Hello and welcome to FI for Kids, a podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic DeLaquil. Our guest today is Arunjay Katakam, the author of Generation Hope, How Inclusive Economics Can Help Us All Thrive. Once an investment banker on a path to extreme wealth, Arunjay had a change of heart and mind and is now focused on helping others. We're going to talk about the concept of inclusive economics and how parents can balance guiding their kids to financial independence and doing good for others. Welcome, Arunjay, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Dominic. It's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
So before we get into your interesting story and your pivot with your priorities, let's start with just what you learned and what was your experience with money when you were growing up?
Yeah, I really have thought about this deeply because so much of society's programming hits us at such a young age. And I see this even with my kids today, which, I'll talk about later, but it's this, all of the different things that we're told without actually being told, and that forms a money blueprint. And for me, money equals success. That was the big thing that, I can take away. So that, it was a measure of success and nothing else really, just money. And it didn't come from my parents, because my parents were, kind of, I wouldn't say ambivalent, but they were not chasing money. They had made a lot of choices in their lives to prioritize, family and lifestyle over money. But wider society, told me otherwise. And, from a young age, so at age 9, I went to boarding school, and, the first 2 years, quite young, but age 11, you start getting tuck, biscuits, chocolates, things like that. And I was very good at not eating these things as much. I didn't have a sweet tooth then. Mm. And then because they were, kids older to me, and so I learned very quickly, you could trade all these things, And so trading snacks was my first sort of entrepreneurial adventure. And it was like you would get just close every 2 weeks you got this tuck, the snacks. And closer you got to that, the higher the premium you could get. So 2-3 days before, everyone's finished all of that thing, they're desperate, and you can do up to, 2 for 1 and like that kind of thing. So I also learned about bad debt, because there was this one kid who took a lot of my tuck. It doesn't matter what what I was offering, like even the really high kind of trades. And then he just had so much in the end that like he couldn't possibly repay it. Mm-hmm. So that was an interesting experience as well. But outside of that, kind of really I was quite entrepreneurial in my teens, and just I guess like learned to be careful with money. And looking back, I see so many of what I had learned and what I had just accumulated was like really quite poor habits or mindset wise, because you realize like you actually shoot yourself in the foot like so many times. And it's happened to me.
In what way? Like, what's an example of
I mean, the classic one, right? Penny wise, pound foolish. Uh-huh. And so everything abstracts to that, because when you have the kind of a money blueprint, which is in a scarcity mode, you are, and that's what I had. Like for me, it was all about accumulation and, like this is a finite sum and I need to, so, and the fear of losing money, being high.
Now, Arunjay, now is that something that you got from your parents and your family, or is that a vibe you picked up on at home, or was that just something you found yourself with on your own? Do you know?
Yeah. So again, like I said, I've thought about this deeply, and I actually in the book I write about my experience with my parents, because my parents they weren't like super savvy when it came to money, but my dad especially was and is still today, like very happy-go-lucky. So he's got a kind of abundant mindset. If someone asked him for money, he would give it to them. It didn't matter how much he had or not, so it was interesting for me because it's taken me like 30 years to, go through all of that to end up where he is. And I still wouldn't say I'm as generous as he is, because for him, it's just a very, very natural thing. And I've talked to him about it a lot. How did you achieve this, And, he's explained kind of based on his life and how things unfolded for him, and he just believes that, I can afford to give this person this money, even if they're telling me an untruth, because, everyone come with a sob story.
Sure.
I need money because da-da-da happened and whatnot. And it's like, how do you know they could just be, but he's like, I know they need money. I can see that. It doesn't matter what the story is, it's clear that they are struggling. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to ask for money. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting. The story is secondary, and the need, and he said, like, even if that story is not true, but I can afford to give it, and it was very. But this is more in the last sort of 5 years when I really kind of spoke to him in detail about that. But coming back to me, it was wider society. It was just kind of everybody else. But one of the things my parents believed and still do today is that, like, investing they think of it as luck, and they think they were unlucky.
Interesting.
Because they bought some shares in some companies very randomly, and those companies didn't do well. And, I guess, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you didn't have this concept of buying the index. Although, Vanguard existed in the US, but certainly not in India. And so it was very much a stock picking exercise in those early. And so they ended up with this, kind of mindset that, investing is, only good for people who know what they're doing or have that. And we know that's a false narrative. Mm-hmm. So many financial planners and financial advisors are, leveraged to the hilt and fully in debt.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's all, so many times they're just betting on some outcomes, and when it works out, it looks great, and when it doesn't, it's not. So I think those are some of my early memories.
So then so it sounds like both the scarcity mindset, like there's a limited amount of money and you've got to hold on to it. Also, then the idea of, well, you wanted to be, because early on, you wanted to be super rich, right? And so those are things that you didn't necessarily get from your family. Those are things you just picked up from kind of surrounding culture and just sort of cultural influences and stuff. And you decided that was the path you wanted to be on. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to distinguish between my parents and family. So the wider family certainly drove that same influence as society. My parents were kind of an anomaly in that. So, again, I think it's kind of like around age 11 when I think about, and again, I was in boarding school at the time, so there's another set of influences over there. And some of them were from really wealthy backgrounds. But this whole idea that money equals success kind of fueled my desire to be super rich, because that meant I'm successful, I've achieved, what society says I should, kind of thing.
Yeah, all the outward trappings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was that kind of thing. And then because I, is naturally entrepreneurial, it kind of said, okay, I can do this, and this is how I do it. And again, that in itself is a false narrative. The success rate on entrepreneurs actually making, versus having a good paying job and just saving that money. There's so many different strategies. The latter one probability is much higher than actually succeeding as an entrepreneur.
If I can jump in for a second. So succeeding as an entrepreneur in a big way.
In a very big way.
Yeah, because I think there are lots of entrepreneurs who do small businesses or do different sort of side hustle things, and they can make that work for them. Right. And I think there are plenty of people doing that for different amounts of time. And that can be, at least in my opinion, that can be a useful thing to pursue. Not that pursuing a huge successful business isn't something worthwhile to pursue, but to me, that's where the odds of that actually having some explosive, big, huge thing are kind of like the odds of becoming a famous athlete or a famous actor or whatever, right? Like it happens, but it's rare.
Yeah, totally. And I fully agree. And thanks for actually clarifying that. And when I was saying I wanted to be super rich, that was the stratosphere I was aiming for.
The big, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sure. And I in the decade 2010 to 2020, I came very close 6 times, so each time something happened. My grandmother told me this famous saying. She said, be careful of the slip between the cup and the lip. You're going to drink the thing before, So it's right in front of you. You see it, it's there, but it's not, the illusion of it all. And for one reason or the other, it just didn't pan out. And looking back now, I have not only no regrets, I'm actually grateful because part of that soul-searching experience set me on this path to figuring out my money mindset and why. Why was I really sabotaging myself? And it went back into my childhood and all of this and what I was doing and how I was doing it. And also that shift then, that allowed me to shift from a scarcity mindset to an abundance one. And I think the really cool thing is, when I thought about why do I really want to make all this money, when I thought about it deeply, and this is kind of 30 years after I embedded that as a kid, I was like, well, I just want to do good. I want to help other people.
Yeah.
And so I was able to just let go of that because I could shortcut the process. I can do good now with other people's money. There's so much philanthropy in the world. Like, why do I need to make it myself and then channel it back? That may take 20 years, 30 years. It may never happen. So that's been kind of my biggest change. And it's been so liberating because I'm not chasing that anymore. And also not having made it means I can actually genuinely and authentically share this message with people that actually we can all thrive without the millions. Because, again, in the book, there's all of these studies and one of them in particular with rich people is like, how much is enough? And this study is a very interesting one where everyone said 2 to 3 times. So if they were worth 100K, they were like, yeah, if I was worth 200 or 300K. If they were worth $1 million, it was 2 to 3 million. If they were 10 million, it's 20 to 30 million.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you can see this is a never-ending bottomless bucket. Like, you cannot fill it. Like,
right.
No matter how super rich you get, and if you look at the people in the top 10 richest people in the world, and they're just killing themselves to, outcompete the other ones on that list in one way, some shape, form, or fashion.
Yeah, always searching for more. And that doesn't mean that, and I think, so just to kind of backtrack a little bit, because I think it's so important, some of the things that you said. So, because I've, in my own way, had a similar journey, and it's so important, this idea of self-exploration and trying to understand yourself and why you want what you want, and is that really the best way to get those things, or are there other ways? And tied in with all that is what you mentioned about your money mindset, right? And I think there's a lot of things that all of us have that it takes a while to realize, and you really got to look for those things. Do you have a scarcity mindset? Do you want to be an entrepreneur, but there's something sort of deep-seated inside you, but you also feel like, no, I'm never going to quite be successful at that, right? I mean, and those things are really, can be really hard to see. But at the same time, if you don't look for those and don't do what you can to identify those and understand yourself better, and as parents, right, if you're not trying to see those tendencies in your kids and try to help guide them to understand themselves better, then it doesn't matter how much money you make. You can never really be happy because you're looking for something to make you happy from outside, right? And one of the things that I bring up all the time on the show, and that I think is a big part of the financial independence movement, at least, is this idea of knowing yourself and knowing what you value so that you're spending wisely. It's not that you shouldn't spend money. You don't want to have a scarcity mindset where you never spend and you're living some life of deprivation. But if you can identify the things that really bring you joy, then you should spend on those, right, in a way that supports your overall financial plan. But then you can also not spend on things that don't really matter that much to you. And one of the things that I think people fall into, and this goes to your point of those studies, is it's so easy for people to fall into the trap of, well, this is what other people are doing, or this is what people in my neighborhood are doing, or this is, or this is what I see on TV, and this means I'm successful. Like you were saying, oh, if I have all this money, but really that doesn't make you happy. And so that's not what you should be pursuing. You've got to identify what brings you joy, what makes you happy, and then focus on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just think it's so important to tie all that stuff together, because to me, that's really at the heart of, and especially as parents, if you're trying to help guide your kids, that's at the heart. And the sooner you can start that process, right, then, so for you, if you'd have had more guidance, if I'd have had a different level of guidance when I was younger, maybe we could have gotten to a better understanding sooner.
True. Yeah. And I think, I'm still trying to figure this part out, because it'll play out with my kids. Like, is it that I could have that influence on them? I know we all have, as parents, some influence, but society has, I think, a greater influence. And so how much can we, actually move that needle? Or is it a journey that they need to go on, like I did and you did, and come to this later in life? So this is still where I'm not sure that we can shortcut this for our kids. But we can, I think, intentionally we can certainly, so one of the things I do with my son is, he's 9 years old and he's very enamored by nice things, fancy things, When we get on a plane, we turn right, we walk past all the good seats to the back. And he asked me, why can't we go in business class or first class, whatever it is. And I'm like, well, we could if we wanted to, but we're choosing not to. We are, making certain choices based on what our values are, what we believe. And so I have these conversations with him regularly to say that, I don't want him to have the mindset that we can't afford, because that drives scarcity faster than anything else. Mm-hmm. And, in some cases, so the thing is that we can't afford it all, for sure, but we could afford one of those things, individually, but we're making the choice that we don't want it, and that it's a very simple and subtle shift in language, but drives a very different message subliminally than, we can't afford it, that's not for us, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your question, because I think that's a really great question that all parents have to sort of struggle with, not just with money, but with everything with your kids, right? And so I think, and ultimately, I think the answer is a little bit of both, right? So you do what you can to sort of set them up with a base, right, and a background and some understanding of things, and ideally an openness and communication with you about whatever it might be. I mean, in this case, right, we're talking about finances. So talking about money and talking about we could do these things, but we're choosing not to. And here are the reasons why, I think is important, because it gets them thinking about it and a better understanding rather than misperceptions, which is easy for kids, right? They'll pull things that you never intended from all kinds of things, but also establishes from early on with him, oh, we're going to talk about money and that's okay. So then as he gets older, because ultimately, right, you try to establish a base for them, but then yes, it's always got to be their own journey. And no matter what we do as parents to guide them and set them up, they're going to go off on their own. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have successes, and they're going to learn from those and figure out their own path and their own way. And, that's where when they get to a certain age, you kind of have to let things go. But hopefully you've established also that communication and that relationship. So then they come back and they're talking to you about it. So as they make mistakes or as they're trying to figure things out, you're there now instead of, the guardrails are not what they were when they're younger, but you're able to provide advice and mentorship and guidance. And even if they make mistakes, hopefully that conversation you've had helps them learn from that mistake quicker. I think back to where I started. I think the answer, at least in my opinion, Arunjay, is a little bit of both.
Yeah, totally, Dominic. I think that's true for so many things in life, right? The middle path is kind of the way to go. But yeah, I think still that intentionality, it really does matter. And then they would figure it out. They would have to figure it out. And I think what's sad, in our generation now with helicopter parenting, there is this tendency to overdo and overcook, a lot of this. And I think that's something to be mindful of as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, well, because even when they're younger, they do need to be allowed to make mistakes, right? Because we all learn that way. You just want to, especially when they're younger, keep it from being anything too extreme, right? But otherwise, allowing them to fail or make their own choices and realize, oh, well, I don't have any more money to spend, and now we're going on this trip because I spent all the money that I had. Like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by Million Stories, a Singleton Foundation program. Using the power of storytelling and entertainment to make learning about finances and entrepreneurship fun and engaging, Million Stories is a video channel with over 30 original short series on all sorts of subjects, including adulting with NFL star Richard Sherman, Wags to Riches about pet businesses, Ramen Profitable, which is about bootstrapping startups, Your Brain on Money, about how our brains respond to branding and other influences that affect our money management, George Goes Everywhere, where George goes to a city and explores having a great weekend for $100. There's Startup Kids, the journey of working with a financial coach, and so many more. Visit millionstories.com to learn more, and thanks to Million Stories and the Singleton Foundation for sponsoring this episode.
And actually, there's another thing that you just said that made me think, I discovered I was dyslexic when I was 30. So I had a very checkered education because it wasn't detected and I wasn't very good at exams. And so I failed a lot in school. And that actually made me more resilient, and like sometimes it's not to say that I wouldn't change anything. I'm biased to where I am today, but, it is what it was. And so resiliency was one of the things, and fear of failure was also not an issue for me. And I think that has really helped me because I'm able to get up and do something and fail. And I have some friends who are just petrified of failing because they have been so successful in school, so successful in their early career, and then they stay in jobs that they're miserable. And all, like so much so money mindset this is connected to the money mindset because basically when you have a fear of failure or fear of losing what you've got, like that drives that scarcity, and keeps you in this comfort zone and all of this as well. So I think, this was not by design in any shape or form or fashion for me, but it just happened to work out. And now I can look back and recognize that also as, so all to say that, I'm really trying to be as cognizant of this helicopter parenting because it's so easy to go and fix it for them or just sort it out for them or help them out. And then, and they're just saying, oh, I'll help you, they just... Sure. So it actually actively, you have to put more effort to not do that than to do it.
Yeah, it's so true.
So but then we're doing them such a huge disservice.
I completely agree. I couldn't agree more because right, it is sometimes the hardest thing is like, it's easier for you sometimes to fix whatever, or you just want to take care of them and you don't want them to suffer through whatever it might be. But, again, is that the best thing for them? Oftentimes not. You've got to let them learn to start figuring things out. And sometimes that means more discipline on your part to nope, let them struggle. Yeah, which can be hard as a parent. Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah. And actually just recently my son, was so excited about something and he came to me and he was like, and I had to say no, and because that was just not going to pan out. I didn't believe that that's how we should go. But the disappointment he had as a result of it And I let him sit with it. Like,
Yeah.
not in a, like he wasn't sulking or anything, but I could see he was kind of like crestfallen in that moment, like, because he was really expecting a yes and he was really excited. It's so easy to say yes because you don't want them to feel disappointed. You don't want to hurt their feelings. And in some cases, it's even like you want them to have that level of affection and all of it. Like, I mean, what I've realized is that my kids will love me no matter what. I mean, more or less, unless I do something really crazy. And I will love them no matter what. I've seen enough of life to know this is like the parent-child bond is very, very strong. It goes wrong in some cases, but, those are like extreme and outliers. But for the most part, and we don't have to give them what they want for them to love us more. So for me, being strict, and I'm not like strict on everything or anything, just few things that really matter, is on the basis of, I wouldn't say tough love. Like tough love sometimes is a whole different thing. Like you're actually mean to them, so not that, but just being firm, setting firm boundaries and sticking to that. And then my kids, they know already, they know my position on certain things, and they accept it, like they're actually very adaptable in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, and I think they learn from those things. And even though it can be hard to see in the moment and you wonder, oh man, are they ever going to get this? Or are they going to be resentful, right? All those things are pretty normal. I think every parent goes through those to some extent. But also I think then we're back to, but you're also then you're building that foundation for them. And because, at least to me, I think it's very important that we don't unintentionally give kids a sense of entitlement. Because, right, if they just think, well, I've grown up because they don't understand if they're growing up in a world of relative privilege. And that, I'm not talking about wealth privilege. I'm just talking about, like in the United States, just middle class privilege, which is a really good quality of life compared to most of the world. And you're in the UK, right? I'm sure that's a similar situation there, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but then it's easy to be like, well, great, I'm just entitled to all these things. This is what it is. And I don't, you know what I mean? But no, you're not. These are things that we should not just take for granted, that you should be appreciative of. And it also requires some level of discipline and choices. And so starting to teach them those things with little small things, right, when they're younger, even though they might be resentful about them in the moment, I think is so important, because it does matter over time, and it does start to teach them, oh, okay, I need to think about things and pay a little bit more attention. And you're right, their resentment isn't going to last for you, right, more than, a few moments, and then they move on, because you're right, that bond is very strong. So I think that's a really important point to bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the parents listening, that don't fear that, like don't fear that you're going to lose that. And, I actually have a poster on my wall here. It says, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. And
Nice.
that's, kind of what I keep telling my kids. Like, we can, we're so privileged. We've won the postcode lottery. We've done nothing to really, get this outcome. So now it's up to us. What can we do to help others? And, coming back to the book and Generation Hope, that is the core message is, with the rise in consciousness, we are much more conscious today about, our carbon footprint, how we treat people, and like what was, previously considered okay and not, like the Me Too movement, lots of things. It's driven by this rise in consciousness. And one of the things, capitalism, and capitalism is the best system we've ever invented as humans, but where it is now, like in terms of whether it's late stage capitalism or neoliberal capitalism or whatever you want to call it, is very distorted from Adam Smith's version of capitalism. And that distortion has taken us to places that we as society really are not being served by it any longer. And this income and wealth inequality that is kind of, especially in the last 40 years, is creating this situation where those who have are, kind of trying to accumulate more and more and more. And there's a power dynamic between those who have and those who don't. And if you subscribe to this accumulation mindset. Like if, I need to get as much as I can, then, as much as it's not really a finite sum, but if you take more than your fair share, then, that's really perpetuates the inequality problem. And for me, it was this realization around COVID, which kind of was the genesis of writing the book, but also helped me fully shed this desire to be super rich. Because by that point, long left the investment banking world, and I was working in financial inclusion, trying to really help, the people less fortunate, but still wanting to make millions. And I was like, well, I'm part of the problem, not the solution. And I'm not saying this is for everyone, but certainly for the work I was doing in the area I was doing it in, it was really, if I had to make money serving these people and make millions, then I'm charging them too much. So that was hit me right front and center. And some of the examples in the book is like how, like here in the UK, we have a minimum wage, but we also have a living wage. And there are some companies that choose to pay the living wage, which is about 20% higher. And their employees are so much happier. And so they're able to provide better customer service. And so the business does better overall. So, there are many case studies in the book, from Patagonia and others, like where businesses have created values and stood by them and made, spent more money on all of that, including wages, and been more successful. The key distinction here, this is not charity. This is a good business practice. And, the B Corp movement has kind of taken off, where it's instead of just being about profit, it's about people, planet, and profit. And that's another kind of way in which, So what I'm trying to say is it's not binary. It's very much a spectrum. And there are always going to be people who are very, very extractive, just maximum extraction, shareholder return, all of those sort of things. I equate them to people who smoke, like there are always going to be people who smoke, even though all of the science says this is terrible, shouldn't do it, they know it, they still do it. So it's not that the whole world needs to change, just enough people, so that there is just, and that's what's encouraging for me, because I see that, like I said, the B Corp movement and other things like that.
Yeah, and that reminds me, well, of two things. It reminds me of a book I read years ago by Ben and Jerry, right? So the ice cream guys. And that was their whole thing. They had started from the very beginning that they wanted to integrate, hey, this business and what they were doing in the business with their social or societal values, right? And they wanted to combine them and do them both. And their whole point was, yeah, but you can do that. And not only, like you're saying, it's not, well, we're not sacrificing business for the sake of doing good things societally. We actually believe that they feed each other. And so you gave Patagonia, they're another company that does similar sorts of things. And so I think there are lots of examples of larger, very successful companies who are really integrating these things in a way where, to your point, it's not binary, and it actually helps them be more successful business-wise. And the other thing that reminds me of is saying from Senator Paul Wellstone that we all do better when we all do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
And I mention this because it's connected to our kids, because they are at this stage absorbing everything, and
Yes.
telling them these companies, this is what they stand for, this is why we want to buy from them. So we go out of our way to support those companies versus others. And it's kind of having that conversation, explaining to them why that's the case. And so my hope is when my kids grow up, and whether they get a job or become entrepreneurial, kind of up to them, and how, each person is different. But I hope they'll either choose companies that have those values or create companies with those kind of values. I think that's grounding. And again, we can just try that. I might fail miserably at it, but at least I'm making that intentionality to kind of pass that on.
Yeah, No, I think, well, and that's back to just the idea of talking about money and choices, right? And how, I mean, because all of that fits together. So you're talking about what your values are, as a family, and explaining why, so that again, you're giving them, they're not just picking up societal influences, which of course we can't eliminate and wouldn't want to, but those things always have to be balanced, because you got to take all these different influences that we all have coming at us and find your core within that, and then choose your path that's kind of brings the best of those things together. So having those conversations with your kids, I think, is essential. And then also larger picture things, inspirational things, like, you can, the quote you have on your poster, right? Which is, so what is it again? If you can be anything in the world, be kind.
Yes, that's right. That's it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, right? Like, who wouldn't want that from their kids? If they could take that message to heart and then apply that in whatever way, whether that's just individually while they're young, or like you're saying, if they take that message to heart and then they decide to either work for someone else, they can pick which companies they work for and have an impact there. Or if they do find that they are entrepreneurial, then create companies that are also within that line, right? They want to do good things and be kind. So let's talk a little bit more, just explain, and I think you've kind of already touched on it, but explain a little bit more specifically what inclusive economics is.
Yeah. So I think, Dominic, I have a chapter in the book that's dedicated to inclusive economics, and I find like that's the best thing to do, is point people to actually reading it, because we'd have to spend half an hour really dissecting just that. I like to distill it in essence. It is really, there are a few principles. It goes into a lot of detail, but if I had to distill it, then it's just, how much and what is our fair share, kind of working that out versus maximization. That's the big difference, because when you're inclusive, you're thinking about the other person. You're thinking about, and because I was saying earlier, there's a power dynamic. When you have more money than someone else, you can negotiate much harder than they can. It's a power law that exists. And, this is where being kind, being generous, all of these things, gratitude is so powerful, but how do you apply that? And that's what it's all about. And really, so one of the things I believe in is, like, in the US there's a big culture for tipping, so it's less, I mean, you can do it there as well on top of the tip that is expected. But here in the UK, it's not really so. But sometimes I give a 50%, 100% tip. And it's a way of just being grateful.
Mm.
And, that person is working hard. You can see, they're doing their job. And especially, so I do it based on, obviously, the person's the experience, So even because, even the person who's not smiling and not being, really giving you great service is also working hard, like, let's face it, But, I mean, we have some biases as well. And certainly we look to, in some way, we have some expectations. And when those expectations are met, I think of it as radical generosity. And that was just one example, but there are many ways in which you can challenge yourself to be more generous, in any way, different ways. It doesn't have to be huge sums. In fact, I do so I have certain things I contribute to, but I always try to do it as often as I can, because I'm trying to build this muscle for a few years, so cutting a check once a month, is good, but it's not good enough. It's not enough. So, but, making that decision to part with money as often as you can on a generous way. But just fundamentally it comes down to this. How can we include more people? But if we are all takers and we're only looking at how much can we get, how much can we maximize, paying as little as I possibly can to that person, we're just going to perpetuate the whole income wealth inequality.
Well, right. And you just perpetuate this idea of, well, I've got to get mine first. So it's kind of, this is interesting to me. So, yeah. So we've had this conversation about, well, you hope your kids sort of get some of these things, but ultimately they have to have their own path. But now what I see and what you're saying right now is, and maybe you didn't have this influence when you were younger, but what I see and what you just said is that's your dad, right? That's this generosity, right? And maybe it took you a while to get there, but whether he did it intentionally or not, he laid that foundation with you, and maybe it takes a while for that to flourish, but it's flourishing now. So that's a cool thread, right? And then I think that's hopeful for parents who then, or you with your kids, right? All of us who, we don't know what things are going to sort of flourish or when with our kids, but we just have to have faith and hope that, look, we do the best we can, teach them what we think really matters, right? Teach them our important values, and then it'll manifest for them. They'll come to their own realizations of those things in their own way. And it might take a while, but yeah.
And actually, Dominic, that is really so cool, because honestly, I hadn't connected those dots. So that is very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You actually remind me of, just in terms of your overall demeanor and just those examples you were just giving of trying to sort of make a difference, even in small ways, and being generous, of my friend Kira. So hi, Kira. I think you and Arunjay would be great friends. But anyway, so where can people, I will put a link for the book in the show notes. Where can people find you?
Yeah, my website, which is arunjay.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. Not super socially super active on the socials. I don't want to replace one thing for another.
Yeah.
I think the vortex of like the world, kind of the technology and the world we live in and all of this is still very much something that we just need to be conscious of in how we engage with it.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think that's, in lots of ways, that's been the theme of the episode, right? This idea of being conscious and aware about what's going on in society, what our values are around money, what we're teaching our kids intentionally or unintentionally, and then what we're being sort of drawn and pulled into otherwise. And it's not that we need to avoid those things or not take advantage of the benefits that they provide, but just to be aware and of what you're doing and intentional about their use. So I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dominic. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you're doing and the book Generation Hope. What's the second part of the title? I always miss that.
How inclusive economics can help us all thrive.
Generation Hope, how inclusive economics can help us all thrive. I'll put the link for that in the show notes. And Arunjay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please support the show by hitting subscribe and receive new episodes every Thursday. The intro and exit music this episode are courtesy of Douglas Cameron. As always, you can find links to the FI for Kids music in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
About the horizon, I can't reach you, you're so far away. And if I run to the place I want you to stay, you'd be gone. I've been left wondering why you moved on, and why you never said goodbye. I can't wait any longer. I see the writing on the wall. It's time for us to say, tomorrow we are yesterday. Tomorrow we